Welcome to the Wine With Us podcast. I'm Keith Spreckles Jr., apparently your host for the evening. We haven't done a podcast in 4 months. Does anybody know? 5 months?
Yeah, I would have said a quarter of a pandemic.
8 months? Oh my gosh, I bet it's been a year and 5 months. We lost a whole year, and I honestly forget that most of the time. We are starting it back up. You're going to start hearing some and seeing some different videos of new podcasts and some of our old podcasts we're going to start re-airing. And we thought it'd be a lot of fun to jump on together, Kelly, Blair, and I, to start talking about, I don't know, the journey of the whole Aquam Vinos process to get to where we are today, a little bit about 2020, and just kind of really, I wanted to dig into what Kelly and Blair think a little bit more about now they've been in the wine industry for long enough and really get their opinions and thoughts. And I didn't prepare them for this at all, so I'm kind of excited to see what happens. Okay, two of the more anxious people that I know, I gave them no preparation for videos that will be going on the internet. So this is good. This is my way of entertaining myself. I'm at home a lot, in my basement a lot now during the pandemic, so I have to find ways to bring myself joy. And so making them uncomfortable is number one. So let's do it. So Wine With Us first before we get started. Kelly, what are you drinking?
I am drinking Albarino.
Oh, very cool. Blair?
I'm drinking Gadeo.
Oh.
Not Gadeo, Gadeo.
Gadeo.
No. I knew when I said it you were going to do that.
Cool. We'll get back more into the wine later on, but I think we're going to re-air an older podcast that we did. I'm a little nervous about it because I don't remember what I said, but Kelly interviewed me once more about my story and kind of how I got to where I was at and kind of how the company started in my head initially. But we kind of skipped over a fairly important part of that and didn't get to hear from Kelly and Blair. So I don't really know how we're going to split this up, but I think I'm just going to start asking questions and then, we'll make it not very formal. I just want to hear what everybody has to say. So without further ado, Blair.
Yeah.
How's it going, man?
It's going good.
So can you give us a quick recap about how you got dragged into this whole thing? Because you were not in the wine industry. Neither was Kelly. Well, technically Kelly was, but that's for a little bit later on. But Kelly, you guys both came from outside the industry for the most part. And I think you should tell the audience a bit more about how this all came about. I like hearing your version of this. So
Sure. So Keith tricked me. For years, he was playing mind games with me, telling me how much fun the industry was and how if I ever got into this industry, I would never look back. And actually, I had just started a new job, and Keith was like, "You should interview at the place I'm at right now. You should interview for a job here. You would love it. Once you get into the alcohol industry, you'll never turn back." And interviewed, did not pass the test because I did not know enough about alcohol at that time. But went on to do other sales stuff, and Keith and I would drink wine in his basement monthly, if not weekly, sometimes a couple times a week, 2 or 3 bottles at a time. And we were sitting in his basement one night, and he said, "I've got this idea I want to open a wine importer." And I was like, "Okay, go on." And he was like, "Well, I've done this part of the industry, this part of the industry, this part of the industry, but I think I want to do this next part on my own." It's like, "Oh my gosh, dude, that sounds like so much fun. You should totally do it." He's like, "Well, I need someone with a business background to help me get it going." And at the time I was working on an MBA, and I go, "Oh my gosh, Keith, I've got a business background." And he goes, "I know, dumbass. That's what I'm asking you. Like, do you want to do this with me? Like, it's too much work for one person." And I was like, "Oh yeah, definitely." And agreed to it on the spot. And then the next day woke up and realized what I had committed to and talked to my wife about it. And she said one of the wisest things I've ever heard, because it was between this and a job in financial investment. And I said, "I think I could make more money right away, at least in financial investing." She goes, "Yeah, but I think you'd have more fun in wine." And I was like, that's a really good point. But I have like 7 counter arguments. Will you just fight me on this a little bit? And so after a brief discussion with her, I told Keith I was fully committed. And into that year, we both stopped what we were doing and dropped everything and went to Spain.
Yeah, so tell me more about that. I mean, we worked a lot, like on our other jobs that we had because we didn't even get paid. But so what were before we started, because we didn't start full time until the end of May. So when the business started, technically January, so it's January 2018, but I say January 23rd on everything, even though I don't think that's true. So every government form I have is wrong, I think.
Yeah. No, it was January 23rd. So
it was
November
that first 6 months, basically, or 5
It
months.
was November when you and I had this discussion. I met Jay for a beer in November over Thanksgiving break, and he goes, I think you guys are onto something. You need to go get investment money. Here's how you need to do it. I'm willing to help you guys out at night as you're working on this. Just let me know. And January 2018, on paper, we were officially a company. February 2018, I had my first child. May of 2018, I graduated from grad school. And June of 2018, we were in Spain convincing wineries that two guys from Manhattan, Kansas were the right guys to import their wine. So
Fast talkers and fast drinkers. So yeah, essentially January to June, all we did was drink 3 nights a week and stay up till midnight and like plot things out. Yeah. Inefficiently, mind you, now that I look back on it, but it was fun. And what?
So, sorry, this is important to the story too. When we would first start working together, Keith would put on Kenny Loggins' Pandora.
Kenny G radio.
Sorry, yes, Kenny G. Way different.
Way worse. Different.
Yeah, Kenny G for us to work to. And I remember there were several times. Yeah, that's a true story.
Hey, good background music. It's just really quiet. There's no distractions.
It was
really,
yeah.
And there would be a couple times when Keith and I would get into like a little bit of a heated discussion, and then we like there'd be this awkward tension pause in our conversation, and you just hear like Kenny G come on in the background. It broke all the tension.
Yeah, pretty much every time. I like jazz. I like smooth jazz. I like Kenny G. Good. I hogged all the music. So we do all that. We take our first trip to Spain, and you can admit now this is the perfect time for it. So how much of a whirlwind was that first, like, how about first 6 months leading up to when we actually got wine here? Like, I didn't really know what to expect, even though I kind of did. So, like, how do you feel? Like, so, I mean, obviously, I know the first few weeks we're buying things and getting everything ready. That was just more fun because we basically planned the first few weeks out for 6 months.
Right.
When we get to Spain and start doing that summertime all the way to the wine's getting here, like, how did that feel? Like, what's going through your head?
So I think one of the very first places we stopped, we got to barrel taste. Actually, I don't even think I know the very first place we stopped. We were in the middle of Spain. We had no idea. I had no idea what we were doing. I'm not sure you.
We were in Madrid. I didn't even know where we were at. I was like, "Where are we going? Where's this?"
We walk into this warehouse and start barrel tasting, and I remember just like the awe of the experience itself. I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Like there are so many people who have so much more experience than me. I shouldn't be. Like I got a huge case of imposter syndrome right away, and then. But that's
tough. How would you not though? I mean, it was unavoidable almost.
Sure, but it's also like that's motivated me in a huge way to learn the products that we get to represent forwards and backwards, right? Like if I don't know maybe the depth of wines that other people know, all the brands and everything else, I'm damn sure going to know everything there is to know about the wines that we represent. So
that's true.
So that whirlwind of 6 months till the wine got here was. Like it was just this, like every single day was like, hurry up and wait. Cause we were excited for the wines to be here, but like I wasn't fully prepared for what was going to happen once they got here either. And until you're in it, like that's really hard to prepare for. Like what is selling wine like compared to other things that I've sold in my life? Like I knew how to sell things, but I didn't know what questions to anticipate from people. And Keith and I went out in the market together at first, which was hugely beneficial just to watch him work. And see the way that he kind of fed off of other people. But you said this from the beginning. If someone knows how to sell something, you can teach them wine.
And that's exactly the easy part.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like it, but it is. That was a weird 6 months. I don't know with how much we have going on now, I don't really know what we did. I mean, I know all we did was do point of sale.
Your extra time just while you're waiting on the wine to come in.
I think we just did a point of sale material and started trying to sell to people. I think that's really all we did for
point of sale materials. We worked on creating a website so that we looked more professional, getting people to.
Perfect segue, Blair. Thank you. So we realized we're not very good at that part of this.
We poorly executed putting together a website.
But I'll tell you what. We were sure as shit we did it well, though. Before we talked to Kelly about it, we were like, you know what? we did pretty good at this. It only took us 3 months to get this figured out. And it was like 4 pages with some text sheets and stuff. It was actually, it was pretty good. Blair worked really hard on it, but it's just funny. You, for not knowing anything about doing that, it was good. And so then, and the wine comes in what, the end of that year, and we're getting it out into the market for the first time, and then we leave again, and we take 2 weeks in South Africa. And by that time, I feel like we both had a feel for how to speak to wineries, like in the same room, essentially, which is hard to do. And even though I've been in the industry a while, I didn't really know what they were wanting. I think we all three do this together now, but absolute transparency. I don't know how else to operate. And it's gotten us a long way with people we don't know, because when you start to try to pretend like you do things, then you start to step over yourself and lie about stuff. And people do it all the time, try to look better than they are. I think that's why people liked us. We were just like, hey, I don't know how else to do this. Here's who we are. You got any wine for us? And so it was fun, because we kind of then, I mean, Kelly, we started talking with you like right after we started, like by in the fall, I think, right? Like August or September.
Well, yes and no, because you came, well, you were still working for the distributor. You came in to mine and my mom's business to sell us wine. So that's kind of like how we reconnected.
Yep.
And then I had my second child in November, and it was like 4 weeks later, you called me up and said, hey, do you have time to meet? And I'm like, sure, why not? I'm going to have a baby with me, but.
Oh yeah. Okay. I'm back now.
Yeah, you said, I have something really interesting to bring up. Like, I think you might be into it. So I'm like, yeah. So we met for a coffee, and you talked about how you wanted to open up like a wine shop, like a retail shop at some point. I'm like, yeah, that's really cool. Like, I like the retail world. It's interesting. It's fun. I'm like, when are you thinking? You're like, oh, it's probably like 5 years from now. I'm like, yeah, no, I want it now. I'm not waiting that long.
That's perfect.
No, like I want to. Yeah.
Such a whirlwind for me in my head. I almost, because when we talked some after that, when Blair and I started, but we didn't talk a ton. That first basically 9 months, 10 months that Blair and I worked together, in my head was such a whirlwind that I forgot that we talked before. I really did. I didn't now, obviously, but like I tried to make the timeline make sense in my head just now. Oh, it made sense. Oh, we start talking in the fall again. But yeah, of course, I sold you some actually pretty good box wine at the time. After I saw an article of you and your mom in 435 magazine when I was out trying to drink. Oh, sorry, you were on the front. Of course, you were on. I walked in the Tatsu's, and I was like, oh, I haven't seen Kelly in a while. Oh shit, she's on the cover of the magazine. I should call her. She sells wine. I was like, it'll be fun. So no, that's cool then. So you know what? You can refresh my memory then. Did we just kind of like just kind of keep in touch a little bit and then start talking more a lot?
So it's fine with the business, with Pinot's Palette that my mom and I had. I loved the wine side of it. Like, I've always considered myself, creative. So the art was fun, but I really enjoyed doing the wine tastings and helping figure out which wines we should carry and all of that. So I wanted to break in more to that side of it. Anytime a distributor came in, I would talk to him and figure out basically how they got into it and, what they did. And I had no idea how to break into that industry. It just seemed so complex, and I wanted to learn more about wine. So, the first thing you do is Google wine classes, and it's everything from like restaurants doing wine tastings to guild som, going the sommelier route, which at that point, obviously I didn't want to go. I just wanted a basic knowledge of wine, but there were so many things out there. And then like Keith walks into my store, and I'm like, yeah, I like wine. Like, that seems really interesting. Sure. I think that's a good way to learn about wine. So let's do it.
For anybody that's listening that doesn't know any of us that well, Kelly and I were really good friends growing up. So it wasn't like me just to come back around. Yeah, we were all really good friends growing up. Me just to come back around, it was a lot easier for us to pick up where we left off, essentially. So rather than Kelly just jumping in with some random guys into a wine business just to get in, but it was that good of an idea. But no, that's crazy. I really didn't remember that we started talking that early. Well, I mean, it worked out really well. Like I had a really good idea of who we should get together to make this happen. So I'm glad that that memory serves me right, because it worked out like about perfectly.
You're being
I'm really thankful for Her Life magazine. Otherwise, that would have never happened.
So Keith, you're leaving out one of my favorite parts of the story.
Oh,
Keith
great.
has done this more than once, but Keith will tell me something is going to happen, and I'll be like, "All right, man, whatever you say." Keith was like, "Hey, we got to go to Kansas City. We got to grab coffee with this girl. She's great. I know her from high school. She's going to be the first person that works with us full time. It's going to be her." And I was like, "Well, but like I got to meet her still. Like it's not just." He goes, "No, yeah, but she's going to work with us." And after 30, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever our first meeting was, I turned to Keith after Kelly left and I was like, hey, she's got to be the first person that comes and works with us full time. Like,
It's like, Blair, good idea. Let's do that. So Kelly joins us in South Africa before she was even working for us or with us. I mean,
yeah.
full time. At the time, that's what's funny. At the time, we were like, oh yeah, Kelly, come work for us. And turns out like 3 weeks in, we were like, listen, we all in the same amount. This is dumb. Like we're all doing this together. It didn't take very long for us to get that figured out. But Kelly, I'm curious, the same question as I was asking Blair. When we went to South Africa, not really like, what was kind of going through your head? Like it was like, and Blair had even been actually in it for longer before then. So you just kind of got thrown into the fire. We talked about it before some, but I'm not sure there's much for you to be able to prepare for. So you didn't really let on if there was anything going on, but like, I'm really curious. I don't think we've ever asked you this question. It's like, what were you thinking?
Well, from the beginning, like we had been talking about me coming on with the company for a while. We had had team meetings, like all of that.
Yeah.
But my first official business with the company was going to a completely different country, a completely different continent with these two guys. So telling that to my husband, like, yeah, so I'm going to be part of this company. Like, I'm going to go to South Africa with these two guys, like go to wineries, taste some wine, like, leave my two babies at home too. Like, it's going to be fine. It's going to be great. So that's like the first thing that was like, yeah, this is weird. Because he was like, yeah, like, go get it. Like, go, like, 100% supportive from the beginning, obviously. It was funny because, like, he had a ton of people coming up to him, like that's kind of weird, right? And he was like, no, like, she's going to go get it. She's like, she's going to help build up this company. And that's, what they have to do. And so I was feeling pretty confident from the get-go. Like, get on plane. Like, I consider myself really well traveled. And from a marketing standpoint, it's like, I knew what I needed to do. I knew the shots that I needed to get, like everything. And then as soon as we got to the first winery, it was like stage fright.
Yeah.
Like, I like wine. I drink a lot of it. I know nothing about it. That was the first realization. Like, oh, we're in a winery. It's the first time I had been in a winery before. Like, oh, this is what grapes look like. Like, not that don't come in a bag at a grocery store. And just the constant nodding along as if I know what they're talking about, like about the winemaking process. Oh, and this is like, we do this and we do that. And I'm like, Googling everything after we leave. I tried to do some research before we left. I did research on the wineries. So I knew the history of the wineries themselves. But as far as the wine and the winemaking process, I knew nothing. So it helped, like, as far as like the shots that I should have gotten, like I am kicking myself now that I didn't know more, because I would have gotten video of certain things now that I'm actually in it and have educated myself and whatnot. So yeah, no, it was a big wake up call, slap in the face, whatever you want to call it. Like,
I bet it was. I'm sure Blair felt the same way too. Cause like, it's hard how do you prepare for that? Like, what are you supposed to do? And nothing I could have said would have helped either of you going out into that, which is why if you both recall at different times that I was like, hey, if you ever don't talk if you don't want to. And I wasn't being mean. I was like, if you don't feel like it's okay if you don't want to, because like nobody's going to care. And I hope that helped at least a little bit, because there was just situations where I would talk for like 45 minutes, which I'm completely fine with. But like, hey, if you don't want to talk, focus on the wine and taste. When they leave, we'll talk about that, because you both love wine and understand that part of it. And you understood it then too, even if you didn't feel like you did, right? And so I'm sure hopefully that helped with a little bit of an out. I mean, because especially early on, like the first couple days. I mean, Kelly, the Pete Pitt thing just was.
No, so that was the thing. Like, so like I took your advice to heart, like, okay, just don't say anything. So I was like that weird mute girl with the camera. And then all of a sudden, when I'm one-on-one with the owner and winemaker, and I'm looking around and like no one else is with me. So I'm like, all right, awkward silence. I have to fill it and start talking to him about this pet meerkat. Was it? He was a
Yeah,
meerkat.
we were at Kiermont Estate in Stellenbosch, and the owner Mark was Blair ran off somewhere. I walked over to finish buying this wine, and we were getting ready to go to Robertson, and everybody knows the family in Robertson that we went and saw, and so he was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna do the worst impression right now, just in case you want." So he was like, "Say hi to the meerkat Pitt," and so they have a meerkat, and the meerkat's name is Pete. But Mark said, "Say hi to Meerkat Pitt," and he said it enough that Kelly, when we were leaving, you tried to fill the silence with something along the lines of, "What? We'll say hi to Pitt for you."
To the family, and I'm like, "Oh, do you have anything for Pitt?" And he like gave me this look, like, "What the hell are you talking about?"
Yeah,
and I'm like,
Pitt.
Pitt. Like I just kept saying, like,
yeah, and
because I hadn't spoken for like days at that point, and so
he kept going, like, Pitt, and Kelly's like, "Pitt."
The more I said it, just the more confused he was.
Pitt.
He's like,
Pitt,
Pitt,
Pitt, Pitt, and I was like, Pete, and he goes, "Yes, Pitt."
Keith's the bigger jerk here because all you had to do, Keith, was be like, "Oh, you mean Pete?" And everyone would have been like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." But instead, you watched it like it was a Wimbledon match, just back and forth.
I did happen to walk back right when it was happening, and I was just like this.
Back and forth. Yeah.
It was one of my favorite things of all time because I heard it, and it wasn't that I was done paying for the wine. I heard it happen, and I turned around and stood right there. I was like, I'm gonna watch this. This is good. Oh, I'm sorry.
So then I didn't speak another word for the next like 5 days.
Oh, no, like I just. It's tough, and I don't even mean that like when somebody listening to this could hear that and think that's like in a bad way. I more say that to make anybody feel comfortable because it's really hard to jump in a conversation when you go to a winery and you're part of a wine company. The people that you're talking to assume you know everything about the wine making process every time you talk to them, when they shouldn't, and they don't mean to. It's just their life, so they start talking. And rather than stop every time and go explain that, it's easier to take notes and then ask afterwards. And it's also intimidating to speak up when, if Kelly, you would have asked questions to Mark, he wouldn't have cared. It would have been completely fine. But how do you feel about that, right? It's more of a mental thing for you guys when you first start doing it. So it's just this thing. It's like, it's okay if you don't want to say anything. It wasn't a big deal because nobody would think anything of it. But I don't know, by the end of the trip, and Blair, for you too, by South Africa, you were like locked in, right? But Kelly, by the end of that trip, by the time we got to Stellenrust Sunday morning, by the time we got to Stellenrust, were you like, did you feel differently? Did you adjust pretty quickly? Because I think when we saw Lucas, you seemed different at Lucas's house than you did with everybody else, and that was like the last one.
Lucas Van Lagerberg's house was the most relaxed setting because we were literally in his house after they had just celebrated his son's second birthday with the family. So like they were just inviting us in as part of the family. So it was a relaxed setting in and of itself, which helped. But it just made me realize like how much I didn't know, and I couldn't wait to get home to just start buying books and reading everything I needed to know so I wouldn't be in that position again.
Totally. I totally understand the feeling. And shoot, that was 2019, and we kind of hit the ground running. Like we did a lot of distribution, which actually we originally had brought Kelly on. She helps with all the marketing stuff. Well, does all the marketing stuff, and does anything to do with technology that she's basically training herself how to do it. But to run our online wine shop that opened in February of this year, we're talking about 2019 right now. That was what Kelly, we originally were like, Kelly, it'd be great. You run our online retail shop. So Blair was already in his role essentially, right? Blair was just adjusting his role as we went. So Kelly, you had a long basically learning curve of what direction, like where you were going to fit. I'm sure that wasn't easy because I mean, Blair had the same issue, just in a different way. How does he personally fit, right? Which you eventually figured out that you were better at sales than all of us, and now you're just killing it because everybody likes you. So like those first couple of years leading up to the pandemic, because I kind of think it's different now than it was, because I think your perceptions have changed probably. But the layer leading up to the pandemic, like by the time right before we got there, where we kind of hit our growth stride, we started figuring things out. How did you feel like your perceptions of the wine industry, like what were they different than they were before you started? Like after you got it, the hang of it, figured out what you were doing, like you feel differently about it than you did before you started?
Oh, for sure. I've worked a couple different jobs where the mindset has been work hard, play hard. And it just seemed like everyone in the wine industry or even the alcohol industry in general was like playing harder than anybody else. And I really liked that a lot and definitely had a love for wine. And I thought, man, if I get to drink wine and taste wine on a daily basis and hang out with people, that's a dream role. And what I didn't anticipate was how hard people were working to make the fun side of it more fun, right? So if you've ever been to a wine dinner or a wine event where you get to taste multiple wines and it just looks like the people who are working the event are having so much fun, they definitely are, but I didn't anticipate how much work has to go into it to make that event so much fun. And I still, both of you know this about me, I still get stressed out right before events.
No,
Yeah,
no.
this is the industry secret about Blair Coker. Every once in a while, I do get a little bit stressed out. It's self-induced pressure. I want everything to be perfect. I want everyone to have as good a time as I've had at previous events. And so I put this pressure on myself and the wines involved, the people involved, everything to be perfect. And the secret that no one will tell you outside of this conversation is that there's a lot of times when things don't go as planned. And unless the person running the event conveys that, no one ever knows and everyone has a good time anyway. And so I can think of a handful of examples just in the past month of things that were done last minute to make the event successful and the people at the event never knew otherwise. And I think
I
that's
used to
what
always tell you, I ran wine dinners where the chef didn't know the menu until like an hour before the event, or during the event they've adjusted. Like nobody even knows.
oh my gosh, that stresses me out.
Come back here. What are we pairing with the third course? We're before the third course. Like are we switching it? So yeah, no, that's a good point.
But it is, again, it's the most fun, and my wife commented on this the other day. She said, I just feel like you like enjoy your coworkers so much and you really love what you're doing. And I was like, well, yeah, of course. Like it would be cool to be in this industry no matter what, but the fact that I get to work with you too is it makes it that much better. So
Oh, well, that's sweet. Anyway, so Blair, you're kind of like in the trenches, like out in the market. So I have an easier time understanding how difficult, maybe not even difficult, how the transition would be like from what you were doing before and now being like out in the market all the time. Kelly, I'm curious for you, the same question, but how it was different for you, or maybe it didn't feel different. You've done similar things before for other companies that you do for us. Obviously, it's way different now, right? Now that you're finally in the point where we're we're hitting full stride of utilizing your talents how we should have in the first place, and where we have all the options for you to be able to do. But did you have the same kind of transition, or was it a little different for you? Like, for how long did it take you to feel like you really were in the industry? Because like we're all out in the market doing stuff all the time, and you are some. Or did you not have that same feeling because of the different events and meetings and things we do? You understand what I'm saying? Like, was it different than like being out selling stuff every day and being in accounts? Or like, did it take longer for you to feel like, or did you kind of get the feel right away?
Yeah, no, because honestly, everything that I out like once we got back from South Africa and I started actually working with you guys, the job that I was doing was nothing different than I had done before, essentially. Like, maybe a little bit more design work, which, I'm not a designer by trade, so I'm very self-conscious about that. But honestly, the only time I felt like in the industry was when we had like our little team meetings and doing wine tastings and talking about the wine, because everything else I had done before in previous jobs I've had. So I feel like the first time that I really felt like I was quote unquote in the industry was when we were in Napa canning Casey Mac,
Oh man.
actually.
Yeah.
So I mean, so probably like so a full year, but the fact that like I was never out it doing sales or anything. I was just like kind of behind the scenes, which like I enjoy the things that I do, but as far as being like in the thick of it, like that just wasn't there until like even designing Casey Mac. Like we had started talking about it pretty early on, and then it finally came to fruition February of 2020. So it was at that moment that I'm like, oh, okay. I feel legitimate now. Like I'm a wine industry person.
Yeah, I'm sure that was tough. I mean, we were both, me and Blair were trying to figure out what we were doing still. We knew we needed you, and we knew what for, but as soon as the online store didn't go up like we thought it would, we were kind of like, we got to make sure that Kelly has enough to do that is the
Utilize it.
right things to do. There's so much, I mean, there's always so much to do, but utilize her for the right things until we could figure it out essentially. And that's what so Kelly and I talked about that a lot, was like what direction to go. And so that's perfect because Casey Matt kind of fell in our lap essentially. And I really like, now we're kind of transitioning more into like the last year or so, but I think it's a really interesting thing to talk about. Like creating a brand image, we all did that together at different times, right? So Blair, when we did the Aquam Vinos thing, I know we had Kelly Rimical involved in like the actual design of that, but like, and Blair, I mean, you did both. So I'd love for you guys both to talk about a little bit, like, what was that like creating branding? Like that was such a new thing for me. So I'm curious what you guys think. Cause I really did feel like, and do feel like Casey Matt kind of brought everything together. Like I really do feel, I felt that way the whole time. It kind of brought us all together in a different way than what I saw us before.
So I'll be the first to admit that in the brainstorming idea phase, I will throw out all of my bad ideas at once, and I am willing to own up to it if it's a bad idea. But once someone takes that idea and puts it onto paper or creates an image, and I'm trying to say this in a way that doesn't sound arrogant. Like I know what I like once I see it, right? So Kelly Remical created all these different ideas and concepts for Aquam Vinos, and I was like, no, 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 no. And Keith, it's funny that you brought this up because I remember very distinctly being like, that's the one. And you're like, are you sure it's not? I was like, no, that's the one. You're like, okay, I don't care. And like that was it. Like this is such a fun story. It was literally
I
like,
care more about names than I do anything, and I trust you with that. That's like,
and it was, for me, it was very clear from the beginning, and Kelly did a great job with that. And then once we brought Flowers on, and she started saying stuff about Casey Mack, and Keith had this vision, and it was terrible. Keith's a lot like me in that we're concept people, right? Like we can come up with the idea, we just need someone else to bring it to fruition. And Kelly, I'll let you talk about the design of Casey Mack, but once you guys landed on what it is now, I was like, yeah, duh, that's it. Like it was so black and white for me that it was, no pun
and
intended,
a little color.
that it
Oh,
was
sorry.
um that it was easy. So I I I have ideas and I think they're cool, and then someone else does them better. I'm like, oh yeah, it's very easy for me to recognize that. And so with Aquam Vinos, it was relatively easy to note when the right time was to for that design, and I think the same was similar with Casey Mack. And keep in mind, I saw one of the last variations of it, and once you guys got to it, I was like, oh yeah, duh, that's it. Like it was a very simple question for me, like, hey Blair, what do you think about this? I was like, yeah, that's good, done. So Kelly, tell us more about like what your process was for that.
Blair, so first of all, I think that's why we work so well together as a team, because first of all, you aren't afraid to just like throw out ideas,
You can
and
say it,
Keith,
dumb
I think
idea, you
you
can say it.
are just like,
No
no,
doubt.
but like I think, yeah, we bounce ideas off of each other, and I don't know, it's just like this weird effect that happens that we all end up landing on the same thing, like, yep, that's it. And just like the constant like going back and forth of like, oh, well, what about this? And then, oh no, what if we did this instead of this? And I think that's essentially how we built our business too, because of that. So yeah, no, and Casey Mack isn't, you know, short of that either. Like that's how she came about, was bouncing ideas off of each other. I mean, Blair, we came up with the idea in your, you know, dining room. So
Yeah, like 30 minutes too. Like it
yeah,
wasn't the idea, it's in itself. And Kelly, I know you're not going to touch on this, so I think it's worth saying before you keep going that one of the more humbling experiences in my life, especially in this business, was having a friend of mine who I trust tell me the design sucked originally. And I knew it was because immediately in the moment, I knew it was because I basically was like, Kelly, we should do this. And Kelly still was early enough in the business, and I, believe it or not, I kind of steamroll people sometimes, but
What?
it was still early enough in the business that she didn't really push back when she knew she was right. And I was not allowing it either way. And I learned very quickly that I am not good at many things, but I added something else to the list. So the idea behind the vision of Casey Mack, I should have stopped with that and been done. And I remember calling Chris back and eating shit so he didn't think. I was like, no, that was me. And he goes, great, stay out of her way. I was like, oh, me and her already talked. I don't want to hear from you then. You should have heard me say that. So I don't want to talk to Chris. I'm done with this. You're right. So essentially, once that got out of the way, Kelly, you were able to actually do your thing a little more. So
well, it's funny because when that happened, I remember after Chris left, you were immediately like, are you okay? Like, it wasn't anything about like you. That was just his immediate reaction. I'm like, I'm fine. I was not sold on it either. Like, just because I was the one that like physically created it, does it like it? No, like I am okay with that. Like, so now we can go in a different direction. And because like with the initial idea of the design, was going to be well beyond my abilities and Illustrator anyway. So once we simplified it, I could really run with it. And I think the theme that we came up with for Casey Mack, it fits all of us really well because we all have, you know, a little bit of old soul beyond musical talents, which I don't fall into. I appreciate it.
Nope. Nope.
hey, just like, cut it there, and then
This is
jump past
I
this.
feel like someone needs to go and
I sing really well.
Oh yeah, no, I spent the, you know, 9 days in South Africa with you guys creating your own lyrics to song tunes.
Oh, so I'm not good at that either. Dang. Okay.
Like it just blew my mind, like how you guys could do that. Like I didn't understand. Like it would take me a week. Like, you realize, like when I went to my room at night, like I was thinking, like, oh, maybe I can do that. No, like I could not do that myself. Like I did not have.
Kelly's nights in South Africa, Googling wine terms.
Like, I'm like writing lyrics to songs. Like, oh, maybe we'll listen to this song tomorrow,
Well,
and I can create my own lyrics.
you knew once a day we were going to listen to Africa by Toto. So you were like,
Right.
what rhymes with rains
No.
down?
I wasn't going to desecrate that song, so you know.
But that, yeah, I'm sure the branding was a fun process. I mean, it was a fun process for me. Both times.
I think I love doing research. I love design, even though like it's not in my technical background. I loved figuring out like which direction we should go with the design. So I've always been obsessed with the 20s era, the jazz era, mainly because of the fashion. But that was the era that I felt like really expanded their marketing efforts, really. You know, the posters everywhere, like really eye-catching designs. So I don't know, I wanted to do something with that. And yeah,
It really brought us all together. Like I think it brought everybody together.
like, I liked the simplicity of it, and I liked you know, it needed to be dark, no matter what. Like it needed to have like a noir feel to it. So I can't explain it, but after all of the images, like the inspiration that I went through, just landing on one, I'm like, this is it. So, I mean, it's just like Blair with the Aquam Vinos logo. It's like, this is it. This is the direction that we're going to go. And then, once I came back to you guys with it, it was the immediate reaction, like, yep, 100%, like, love it. Like, it was, serendipitous, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And it's pretty cool because it was like it was the missing piece for us in a lot of ways, but mainly because I felt like that you finally felt like you found your place in the company, even if we didn't have the online store, because that time we didn't know if we were going to have it still, but it didn't matter anymore. Right. And so it was like we all kind of hit our stride. And then, of course, I'm going to glaze over 2020. We talk about it a lot. We could probably come back and do a retrospective about 2020 if we ever wanted to. It actually would be interesting, but that would take up a ton of time. And I'm so sick of talking about 2020.
Hindsight. 2020, that can be unexpected.
That's good, Blair. But it fast forwards us to basically now trying to figure out how to finally bring everything together, which I think I feel like it took us until probably October of 2020. That's about when I was like, oh, this is what we're doing. That sounds really scary to people listening to this, being 2.5 years or longer into a business. But I listened and talked to a lot of people that have ran their own businesses before, and I don't feel like that's that out of the ordinary. I'm also trying to temper myself a lot, because at the beginning of the pandemic, we just started throwing stuff at the wall and hoping it started working out. And we were like, because we have a lot of good ideas, and what we figured out was everything started to kind of take shape about that time. And it's fun to be able to see and look back on now with where everybody's at. And I mean, I kind of want to wrap up with this. So because we didn't even talk about it at the beginning of the podcast, but we talk about it a lot, but I'm curious where the mission of what we do now that we have a handful of different ways that we do give back to children's charities, and it's growing pretty exponentially, and we're doing better with that. Like, where does that come in for you guys when you think about, like, we talked about it before we started, but we didn't really have a good vision of how we were going to give either. Like, now that we kind of figure that out together, like, where does that play for you? And Blair, we can start with you since we've done that with everything, but where does that, well, we have every time, I just went right to you. So
I feel bad, but I have an answer for this. So Kelly,
no, I'm curious what you think. Like, where does it play for you now when you think about how we operate, and like you personally? Like, I'm kind of curious.
So a couple things come to mind. Number one, and I don't remember if it was an article or something someone said when we were first still in the the basement tapes of putting together Aquam Vinos. Keith and we hadn't even, I don't think we were officially a business on paper yet. And I'm going to say it was an article, but it said, if you are a business that wants to give back and you think you're going to meet a certain threshold and then start to give back, you will be used to the amount of money coming in, and you will say, well, let's just go a little bit further. And so it became something that we decided from day one. Our business might not have made it to 2021, but we were going to be a business that gave back. We could have gone bankrupt, but we were going to be giving while we were bankrupt. Like, it was a very scary thought, but it was something that it was like, well, this is too important to not incorporate from day one. And so I remember that very vividly. And then the other thing that I remember, and this happened just recently, a friend of mine said something along the lines of like, what is your life purpose or mission? Or do you feel like you're on the right path? I don't remember the exact phrasing of the question, but I said, there might be a time in my life when I'm not in wine, but I know that the mission that I'm currently living out is the right mission that I'm supposed to be on. And so he said, well, tell me more about that. I said, well, I hope that I'm in wine for the rest of my life. I love what I get to do every day, but I know that having a component of giving back is way more important for not legacy purposes, but just for the greater impact, right? The greater good than anything that I could ever do in selling 6 bottles of wine into a retail store, which is cool. And I love every time I get to do that. But the fact that there's money from every sale going back to help those who are in a position that is less fortunate than I'm currently in, that is what drives me and motivates me every single day.
Kelly, same question.
Ditto.
Thank you.
Oh,
Okay.
I was going to say good luck following that, but that was good.
Sorry.
yeah.
I've,
So
I've
fuck
thought
me,
about
right?
Blair, that was good. No, that's like that was spot,
Uh,
that was spot on. Wow.
so the first time everything really hit me was when we went into lockdown and realized that we were doing something worthwhile. Like we weren't just a wine business. We weren't just people that like, hey, we like wine, you should buy some. When we went into lockdown and the charity that we decided on for Kansas City for that Casey Mack was going to donate back to, those kids, their after school program was essentially shut down. Like they couldn't go to it, like their Saturday program, like they couldn't go to it any longer. And these are kids that not every single one of them has internet at home. So they couldn't even go to online learning, or if they did, like they might not have computer access or anything like that. And so the fact that we figured out like how much we could do as a business and still like stay afloat during that time as well, because we hadn't even launched we hadn't even had any sales for KC Mac yet. We had contracts which were immediately shut down because of the pandemic, but we figured out how much like we could give back and how much we could buy. We bought tablets for these kids in this program so they could continue not only their education for school but like their musical education through this program as well, through Harmony Project. So the fact that that was one of the first things that we did during lockdown versus like, oh my God, how are we going to survive? I mean, that was pretty groundbreaking for me because it's like we're figuring out that first and everything else should fall into place. And it has. I mean, you know, we're not some multi-million-dollar company right now, but you know, we're
don't.
doing
We're
it.
really, we're
We're
really
really doing it. So, yeah, I mean, I think that was the first realization to me that it's like, you know, no matter what we do, we're not in it for ourselves. And I think that's what makes it more exciting and more fun overall because there is a greater purpose. There's something to work towards because we're not working like, yes, it is on our terms and, you know, we're creating it, but there's a greater purpose, and and when you can physically see it too, I think that's what makes it more exciting and more worthwhile.
nothing makes me happier than talking to a corporate account of some kind that we shouldn't be talking to because we get a hold of them and I'm like, hey, listen, if you buy from us, we're working on changing the world. And they're like, well, don't guilt trip me, essentially is the attitude that I get. And I'm just basically like, listen, you don't have to buy from us, but then these kids don't get any help. So, oh, the wine's good too. And I've had more people like, oh, they all really get behind it, but I could feel it when they're like, did you really do that? I'm like, yeah, I did, because if you buy it, you'll buy a shitload, and then we can give a ton to these kids too. So yeah, I don't care how we have to go about it. So, but it makes me feel good when I can feel it on the other end of the line or Zoom or something. When I know I have them, and that's why, because it should be why,
Yeah.
right? But it's like they almost, I don't know. Blair, you've been on. So have you ever been on? Have you ever seen that happen before? Either of you, where like I know Kelly, you don't do as much overall sales as we do, but like it's a really interesting feeling because sometimes it's like it's almost a realization on the other end of the line when they're like, oh, I think they're right, like we're going to buy wine somewhere, like these programs they're helping out are more important than buying this other wine. And it's almost like you can feel the conversation turning. It's kind of cool.
I think the closest I've had to that exact feeling was, I don't know if I can plug certain things or not, but there's a company that makes a product and has an athletic court at their facility, and we spoke with some of their ownership and they hadn't even tasted the wine yet. And Adam Miller and I, who Adam works a lot for Casey Mack and helps represent that as well, we're on this call together. And without ever tasting the product, they were like, we just love your mission and everything you guys are about, and we want to be able to support you. So we'll commit to bringing your wine in and doing these 3 different events. And I was like, oh my gosh, like the wine's good too. Like you should know the wine. Like we're not just, because I think our mission is very important, but if our wine sucked, like it would be a moot point, right? Like no one would no one would care. Our mission is bigger than ourselves, but we've got great wine to back it up, so that always helps. And I think that's the closest, Keith, that I've gotten to that exact moment that you're speaking about. But
it's just fun. It's just fun to see and hear things like that. Like, and it's what's crazy is it took us all a while to get to that point.
Yeah,
we didn't used to want to talk about it because
right.
So when we got over that hump of wait, if we're gonna do this, like, people should know, and we'll be able to help more if we tell people right away. Like, it was, I mean, it's the cornerstone for our business. And what was fun about this whole thing was when I essentially blurted the idea out to Blair and was like, here's what it is, and just brain dumped on him, to now, and in between bringing Kelly in and doing this, I'm not really good at giving things up to other people. I'm sure you all both learned that the hard way throughout this entire process. I still have days, but I didn't guess that I would have been excited to have other people help me shape something, and to something that I didn't expect it would be, but it's better than it would have been, right? The better than it was in my head. So it was really fun. It's been great to get to this point and see both of you come into the industry that I love this industry so much, and to see your different perspectives being brought in to then help shape us into what we are now, to where I have most days where I don't remember where my idea started because it's not where it's at. And I can't say that it's mine, it's not. So it's fun to see our company and our ideas get to the point where we're at now, to where we can do a little retrospective and think about where it started. So it's kind of, and these are things that I didn't know until tonight for most of the stuff that I asked you guys. I mean, we've talked about it maybe in passing before, but not the kind of things that we said. So it was a lot of fun to get to hear that stuff. So hopefully everybody listening had fun too.
One of my favorite things that Keith does is he'll go, yeah, we had this idea. And I'm like, Keith, that was your idea. He's like, I don't know, one of us came up with it. I can't remember who came up with it. And I'm like, well, you came up with it. And you're like, well, but you said something that made me think of it, so it's our idea. Okay, sure, that's fine. I do have one final question, and this is just for Kelly. Thinking back to that first trip to South Africa, was the most awkward part of the trip, was it Keith singing? Was it driving on the other side of the road? Was it the Pete Pitt incident? Was it sleeping for 8 hours on the plane, waking up and realizing that you weren't even halfway there? Like, what was the most awkward part of your trip to South Africa? The listeners want to know.
Is there an answer? Am I missing something?
Oh gosh, putting me like, this is really on the spot. Honestly, which I 100% appreciate both of you guys doing this, but like, the cultural difference between the US and South Africa, and you guys constantly pointing it out.
Oh yeah, sure.
You would go to restaurants and, 'cause in America, serve the ladies first, and, all of that. But yeah, just any restaurant we would go to, or, wine tasting, they would typically serve you guys first. And yeah, and I would be, byproduct, but you guys getting up in arms about it. Like, did you see that? Yeah, at that restaurant too. Like,
it was upsetting. It was blatant. Yeah. I didn't like it.
Yeah, I would say maybe that, like, aside from the fact that I could never join in on the songs that you guys would make up to very popular,
so
like NSYNC songs or whatever.
That was a very good answer. The correct answer was Keith singing. Keith singing was the most part of the whole. So thank you so much for playing.
Popular answer.
Survey says.
Listen, I know what I hear.
Probably the most embarrassing moment was rolling down the windows, driving through Hermanus. So like Beverly Hills of South Africa, and Keith blaring Africa or by Toto.
It rains down there.
I'm pretty sure in South Africa you're not supposed to roll your windows down in general.
Like, I wanted everybody to hear it. Everybody to hear it. We're listening.
Don't look at anyone or anything. You just keep them up and drive straight.
Fired up. I wanted them to hear it. Well, this was fun. I'm glad we finally did this. It was very cool. I don't really have a way to wrap up. I mean, I'm sure I'll put some music on the end, but thanks for listening. Maybe this will be part 2 of a 2-part podcast. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. Hopefully you learned something new about us. And yeah, Kelly and Blair, thanks for putting up with me for 3 years.
Yeah. Only got three. Here we go. Cheers.
Oh my gosh. Until next time.